Alright, stick with me here. Something huge happened last year that honestly got way underreported. We hit what might just be a critical milestone in one of the most important arms races our species has engaged in for the last half-century. And it all has to do with this compound, Zosurabalpin, which is an experimental new antibiotic developed by the Swiss pharma behemoth Roche. Late last year, Roche announced that Phase 1 clinical trials testing the safety and efficacy of this new antibiotic were successful enough to push Zosurabalpin straight into a Stage 3 trial slated for early this year. Even though that's not a guarantee this drug will get approved, Phase 3 is still a huge deal considering most new antibiotics barely make it out of the Stage 1 and 2 trials. More importantly, this is the first time a new class of antibiotic that can actually kill drug-resistant superbugs has gotten this far in the developmental process in over 50 years. But also, it's the way that Zosurabalpin got developed that's the most exciting. The structure of Zosurabalpin was refined and built over multiple years with the assistance of an old-school machine learning algorithm. Today, I want to use Zosurabalpin and its development story as a lens to show you how quickly the science of biology is accelerating now that we're starting to share more and more of our research burden with computers. Can we use bots to eradicate our worst bugs? Let's find out. And hey, welcome back to Clockwork, a show about the tiny, beautiful molecules at the foundation of everything you do. Make sure you subscribe if you want a better understanding of how your chemistry roots you to the world. And check out our community on Patreon to see our latest sticker packs, temporary tattoos, and papercraft molecules that celebrate your biochemistry. But anyway, we've got a lot of ground to cover here, so let's not waste any time. Starting off with antibiotics in general. Okay, let's rush the basics. For the purposes of this video, an antibiotic is any compound we use to control or kill an infectious bacteria that's making us sick, something pathogenic. This is actually a super hard thing to pull off chemically if you think about it, because for an antibiotic to work, it has to cause significant harm to one living thing while not really affecting the live organism that it's inside of. Since we're all made out of mostly the same chemicals, this amounts to a pretty high-stakes game of spot the difference where we're constantly trying to smash bacterial machines while leaving our own component parts untouched. Penicillin is the classic example here. This beautiful compound with its iconic beta-lactam ring jams up the works in bacterial proteins like this one, which knit a sugary mesh called peptidoglycan. This is kind of like the cell wall of gram-positive bacteria, and when penicillin gets stuck in here and blocks production, these bacteria will end up exploding once they try to grow or divide without enough peptidoglycan for full coverage. Nice. But that's not the kind of pathogen we're trying to treat today. We've got something way worse to deal with. There are also gram-negative bacteria that use less peptidoglycan and instead rely on a second cell membrane on top of the regular one. Getting an antibiotic into these guys is even harder because now you have two membranes plus all the goofy stuff in this periplasm to get through. While we've developed tons of antibiotics to deal with bacteria of all types, we haven't built a new class of antibiotics targeting gram-negative bacteria in 50 years. We've just been iterating and optimizing around the handful of antibiotic genres we already have. And I'll get into why that is a little later, but for now, let's keep unpacking how bad of a problem that is first. With very few new enough weapons in our arsenal, some gram-negative species of bacteria have managed to evolve truly overwhelming antibiotic resistance. Catching these superbugs can become a pretty huge emergency. And one of the true big bads of these overpowered pathogens are these guys, which are carbapenem-resistant strains of a species called Acinetobacter baumannii, or crab for short. And Acinetobacter are a tough opponent to deal with even at the base level. They're ubiquitous, opportunistic little blobs that typically move in and try to cut out a little territory for themselves when a person is already severely ill. They clump together in these very tough biofilms, which are difficult to clean, which allows them to persist on surfaces for weeks while they wait to bump into a new host. Their whole MO is persist and resist. They fortify their double cell wall with this hard to penetrate lipopolysaccharide coating. Even worse, that coating will explode off of Acinetobacter individuals if they get engulfed by one of your immune cells as part of a normal immune response. Once inside, those lipopolysaccharides, or LPS for short by the way, turn out to be super toxic to immune cells, killing them and limiting how much of a frontline response you can mount as this bacteria set up shop and entrench themselves. And even worse, if they develop resistance to an antibiotic called carbapenem, that's a whole new world of bad news. Carbapenem is like a streamlined, ultra-efficient penicillin, all the beta-lactam power with no frills. Carbapenem is reserved as a last-line antibiotic for severe infections, but since Acinetobacter baumannii populations can persist so well, that means that crab strains tend to accumulate in places where there are lots of sick people, like hospitals. It's extremely difficult to treat a crab infection, and they tend to cause sepsis and severe pneumonia. With treatment options so limited, crab strains boast a 40 to 60% death rate once they establish an infection. Globally, crab-specific strains account for a little over 50,000 deaths per year, but they also incur a significant clinical burden, and the big concern is that death toll can skyrocket as resistance spreads. So yeah, these guys are a priority 1 global health emergency, top of the WHO's most wanted list. And this is why it's so huge that Zosurabalpin made it this far into clinical trials. This drug has the potential to be a beast. But before we get into why, let's hear a quick message from this video's sponsor, which is, spoiler alert, me again. This episode of Clockwork is brought to you by our incredible supporters at patreon.com/clockworkshow. Making these animations is incredibly labor-intensive and time-consuming, but our Patreon subscribers empower this channel to explore topics that serve our understanding of the science instead of just serving the algorithm. Subscribers also get real perks like our monthly sticker club and papercraft series. We're building a lot of cool things over at patreon.com/clockworkshow. If you like these videos and want to be a part of what makes them possible, check us out and subscribe today. For now, let's get back to the video. So Zosurabalpin is a huge deal for 2 main reasons, that being how it works and how it was developed. I'm a molecular biology sicko at heart, so let's dive into how Zosurabalpin kills these crab fellas first. And right off the bat, do you notice anything about Zosurabalpin that stands out compared to the other antibiotics I've shown so far? I mean, antibiotics are a pretty broad category from the jump, and I haven't shown you anything super comprehensive. But honestly, penicillin is a better representative of the average antibiotic, weighing in at about 330 daltons, with a dalton basically being just a count of the number of protons and neutrons in a molecule. Most antibiotics in the real world that have real clinical use weigh in at around 400 daltons, with the vast majority of them keeping things under 600. But Zosurabalpin is a beast by comparison, weighing in at a few atoms shy of 800 daltons. With that size alone, it's incredible that Zosurabalpin works at all, but I'll try to cover why when we talk about development. For now, I'm locking in on mechanism. Let's check in on how Zosurabalpin solves our little crab problem here. So Acinetobacter is a particularly intense gram-negative fortress to penetrate. Zooming into a single individual, we've got this double-layered membrane, and Acinetobacter is particularly thorny by adding a whole layer of these lipopolysaccharides on the outside. And while this coating gives Acinetobacter an advantage, we're actually going to exploit that when Zosurabalpin comes knocking. These lipopolysaccharides are an incredible added defense for Acinetobacter. They help individuals glue themselves together, block most medicines outright, and wreck the immune cells that ingest and destroy infecting Acinetobacter invaders. But because this gunk is so, well, weird, it needs to be actively pushed to the outer membrane of these bacteria. And that's going to be our opening. All across this periplasmic space, you'll find this little protein conveyor belt connecting the 2 membranes. This is the LPT-B2-FGC complex, but for us, let's just call it the LPT conveyor belt. The 2 B subunits down here use ATP energy to push lipopolysaccharides into the central channel, which then moves them up the bridge and onto the outer membrane. Now, people have been trying to target this conveyor belt for ages, and the underlying theory here is that if we can block this conveyor belt, then this LPS goo won't be up top to block other kinds of antibiotics, allowing them to get entry. But one thing I want to point out while we're here, the team that developed Zosurabalpin wasn't necessarily trying to target this LPS conveyor belt. More on that down the line, just keep that in the back of your head for now. And even more importantly, we're going to see that we don't necessarily need any other antibiotics to come in once Zosurabalpin has broken the LPS train. But you guessed it, I'll explore why in a second. What's important is Zosurabalpin is going to act like a kind of molecular glue that will jam up and break this conveyor belt. Here's how. Zosurabalpin can sneak past the LPS barrier and bind right in this pocket as a new lipopolysaccharide is entering. That chemical bond will be so absolute that nothing is going to pry this antibiotic out of this channel, basically welding the LPS to the channel and sealing the whole thing shut. And there's going to be no more lipopolysaccharides making it up through this conveyor belt. We have completely shut down this transportation mechanism. Nice. But that's where it gets interesting, because we don't actually need Zosurabalpin as like an opening move that just drops Acinetobacter's shields before we throw out the real fatal blow. This drug by itself kills the bacteria outright. Because it turns out these bacteria have a completely separate sensor that tells them when to stop making that LPS coating. When the outer shell is full, excess lipopolysaccharides will overflow and bump into this protein, which turns off the LPS factory inside the bacteria. However, with this conveyor belt turned off, that switch never gets flipped and these lipopolysaccharides build up down here in the bacterial cytoplasm with no way to get transported out. And you might remember from before how I said this stuff is super toxic to our immune cells. And I mean, yeah, it turns out we're all made out of the same chemicals here, and a high LPS concentration also becomes pretty toxic pretty quick for Acinetobacter. So this LPS will build up enough to poison Acinetobacter individuals to death with their own cell wall coating. Nice. Congrats, crabs, you played yourself. Nice strategy with that goo barrier. Hope you all enjoy the slow creep of metabolic collapse. So, in short, to review, this very large new class of antibiotic wedges itself into this bacteria's goo conveyor, which causes a toxic buildup of lipopolysaccharides to nuke this punk from the inside. Awesome. And while this is all cool and exciting, remember, we're only in Phase 3 trials here. Phase 3 is genuinely a big deal, but it's no guarantee that Zosurabalpin will clear the high bar it needs in order to get real-world approval. If it does get approved, though, the papers that announced Zosurabalpin and described its mechanism also managed to identify a handful of promising new drug-binding targets, which will allow researchers to expand this new antibiotic category with more compounds that get out ahead of any resistance old Krabby here manages to evolve in the meantime. But that's the gist of the landscape and a high level of the mechanism of how Zosurabalpin works. But honestly, that's not the cool part of the story. I mean, it is to me, but whatever. That might not even be the reason you clicked on this video. Sorry for bearing the lead, by the way. The really interesting part here is how Zosurabalpin was developed. Like I said at the beginning, our civilization is approaching a potential antibiotic resistance crisis. Bugs like Acinetobacter have been able to evolve crab mode because we just haven't been able to meaningfully expand our antibiotic arsenal in the last few decades. But why though? It has to do with how we've gone about discovering new antibiotic compounds. And I had a whole long bit explaining that scripted in this video, but luckily the good folks at Minute Earth put out a really solid summary of the problem. Y'all should check that video out and head back here if you want a little more context. In short, we've largely developed our antibiotics by hunting down weapons other organisms use to fight bacteria. And it kind of looks like we've run out of air quotes natural antibiotics that we can actually discover and refine for now. More context from Minute Earth, please check them out. Which makes Zosurabalpin and its discovery story potentially very valuable, because the research team at Roche that developed this antibiotic did so with the assistance of an old-school machine learning algorithm. And as a non-computer guy, I think I need to make this super clear. This is not generative AI. I'll get to that towards the end of this video. Zosurabalpin was discovered and refined through an old-school random forest machine learning algorithm. Drug discovery can be slow like that, where we're only seeing real results generated from the technology of the late 2010s. But still, how can machine learning basically pull a new drug like Zosurabalpin out of the ether? Check this out. Again, Zosurabalpin is a massive compound that's also very hard to pronounce, and I don't think I'm doing it right. And if not, it's open season on me in the comments. I get it. Why did I cover this? Refining something like this structure without at least a template from the natural world would take eons using old-school drug discovery methods. But scientists didn't just pull this from nothing either. Zosurabalpin is something called a tethered macrocyclic peptide. To briefly dip our toes into the deep chemistry here, macrocyclic peptides have been a big research focus for the past 20 years or so, especially in big pharma and the biotech scene. You basically take a chain of amino acids like any protein and then tether the ends together in a big ol' circle. The hope has been that we can use the diversity inherent in this kind of structure to build drugs with the specificity of things like monoclonal antibodies, which are gigantic, but with the deliverability of a much more compact small molecule drug, think penicillin. Pulling this off and then developing a platform that allows you to build specific use MCPs would be kind of like a mid-tier holy grail in the pharma world. Kinda. At least that's what the press releases make it sound like. Now, some macrocyclic peptides managed to show some antibiotic potential in the past, but since we're talking about peptides here, theoretically you can mix and match any number of amino acid links into a circular chain like this, meaning there are billions of potential macrocyclic peptides we could synthesize. And that's why we need to deploy computers, because Roche took the shotgun approach to try and find useful variants of a macrocyclic peptide, using a method called whole-cell phenotypic screening. It works like this. Roche paid a biotech firm to synthesize a whole bunch of different kinds of macrocyclic peptides. Just shy of 45,000 unique compounds. It then took those tethered macrocyclic peptides and tested those against a bunch of different strains of bacteria. Just that step alone produced, you guessed it, a whole mountain of data to sift through. And this is where machine learning comes in. Building off of a framework developed by a team at UC San Diego back in the day, researchers at Roche scanned every single bacterial strain tested with each one of those compounds and fed those images into a machine learning algorithm that, to oversimplify, categorized how each macrocyclic peptide affected those bacterial cells. That framework from UC San Diego, called cytological profiling, allows folks to identify subtle changes in bacterial structure and metabolism just from these small differences in how these red and blue dyes are processed, which means that teams can filter out less effective compounds real quick. The first round of tests at Roche cut the candidate list down to a single small cluster of similar compounds, with just 4 having the most promise. They further refined these structures by testing which of them would dissolve better in blood plasma, which resulted in what would eventually be the structure of Zosurabalpin. Nice. Nothing like YouTube to synthesize decades of drug research into like half a sentence, right? It's awesome. And yeah, while this section of the video feels like fan posting about a massive pharmaceutical company, it's important to keep in mind that Zosurabalpin is the culmination of tons of diverse research projects from all sorts of different players, with publicly funded traditional research building a foundation that industry players iterated on top of. And that's why this is such an exciting moment in the life sciences. We're seeing a lot of diverse research paths with decades of groundwork starting to cohere in ways that are making the discovery process for lots of different things so much faster. Like, sure, the shotgun method Roche used here works because it's possible to profitably synthesize tens of thousands of different macrocyclic peptides for machine learning assessment, but is it possible to narrow that field before we start building real chemicals in the real world? And you know what? That's going to briefly bring us to the new hotness taking over our economy, generative AI, and specifically for us, generative models for building new antibiotics. I'm going to keep this brief and focus on only one example, but there's a lot of development happening in the life sciences around generative AI. For me personally, general use AI models feel more overhyped than anything, and I haven't found a single way to make AI fit into any of my daily workflows. But models engineered for specific purposes, especially in chemistry, are starting to show a lot of promise. In particular, the James Collins lab out of MIT has been producing genuinely incredible results as they refine their way toward machine learning-powered antibiotic discovery. At around the same time the structure and mechanism for Zosurabalpin was announced, the Collins lab published research tied to an AI model that helped synthesize another entirely new class of antibiotic that showed efficacy against some of the gnarlier strains of Staphylococcus aureus. That was cool, but then a few months back they expanded on that with this monster of a paper outlining a way more intense method for developing new antibiotics. I couldn't be less of a computer guy, so I'm going to boil this down to the most bare-bone details possible. The generative side of this paper comes in 2 parts. First, the team at the Collins lab fed over 45 million possible chemical fragments into a graph neural network that was testing for possible efficacy against Staphylococcus aureus and the bacteria that causes gonorrhea. The results generated from that neural network were then fed into 2 generative algorithms which turned those promising fragments into full synthesizable molecules. Those 2 steps filtered those 45 million fragments down to just 24 potential drug candidates, which the Collins lab then synthesized and tested against live bacteria. This is the key distinction that makes me way more interested in results from generative AI in the life sciences. Once you've AI-generated a possible drug candidate or compound or anything, you can just build it in the real world and use the old-school scientific method to verify whether it works or not. No hallucinations, no vaporware, actually verifiable results. In real life, 7 of those 24 generated structures showed real-world effects on their target bacteria. But this paper goes into way more detail about how 2 of those novel compounds might represent 2 entirely new classes of antibiotic that damage staph and gonorrhea in a unique way. But we have to keep in mind that, at best, this is the very first step in a very long process. Like right now, there's not nearly enough data to see if these 2 compounds are actually promising or not. Verifying if a structure actually works as a medicine requires just so much more data before we can start getting excited and talking about clinical trials. And heck, even the way more promising results from Zosurabalpin can get completely derailed during phase 3 trials this year. You rightly have to clear a lot of barriers in order to prove medicine is safe and effective before you start saving the world with a new class of antibiotics. To hammer it home even harder, Zosurabalpin is the culmination of a tech tree that goes all the way back to 2013. None of these AI-generated chemicals are going to be changing the world tomorrow. And I mean, for real, check back with me in a decade to see if these things actually showed real promise, right? And so, the point of this video isn't to overhype the promise of AI or be a cheerleader for Big Pharma's complicated role in the broader scientific landscape. Instead, I want you to be excited for what feels like a truly revelatory moment in the history of the life sciences. The last 70 years or so of molecular biology has just been one paradigm shift after another. But the advent of CRISPR and efficient sequencing and new imaging methods have empowered fundamental research teams to make all sorts of incredible leaps in our understanding of the base mechanics of cellular life. Of course, those leaps have come with a reckoning that biochemistry operates in ways that are far more complex and inscrutable than we initially predicted. But even if the problems in biology become larger and thornier, our capacity to break those problems down and find solutions that compound on each other appears to be growing at its own exponential rate. As best I can, I want to build a window for you to see all the new wonders coming out of this incredible moment in biology. The next few years are going to be a wild ride as these techniques get more and more refined, and I'm super excited to explore all the twists and turns with you. For now, though, this is just a good start. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for exploring all this with me. And hey, thanks again for making it all the way through this video. If you liked this video, throw us a like and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. We're coming out of a pretty tough period here at Clockwork HQ, and I'm hopeful that means we'll be producing videos a lot faster moving forward. Our subscribers at patreon.com/clockworkshow also help us roll with the punches as those issues come up. Consider subscribing to our monthly sticker club or papercraft series to keep these videos for free for everyone forever. At the same time, check us out at watchclockwork.com and sign up for our newsletter. That's another great way to show your support. Otherwise, you've already been a huge help by making it this far into the video. Thank you so much for being here. For now, real quick, just let me know what your favorite planet is in the comments. I just want to see something here. Either way, I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for being here. As always, I like to leave you with peace, love, and beta-lactam rings. Everyone be well. Thank you so much.